Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this week's Inspiring Leadership podcast. And I've been having a blast of a conversation with Chris Barton. Now, Chris is an accomplished entrepreneur. He's an inventor. He's a tech visionary. When we talked about leadership, he goes, no, not really into leadership, but I am an entrepreneur. And he definitely is. Now, let me tell you about Shazam. Now, Shazam has had 2 billion people download Shazam. It was acquired by Apple for 400 million. It's where you had music recognized. You go, what's that song? You listen to it, and it found the right music for you. As a young man growing up with Shazam, it was revolutionary for me. And now, of course, it's part of what everybody takes as normal. He worked at Google. He worked at Dropbox. He's invented various things. He still has 12 patents. And his latest one is AI to detect drowning in swimming pools called Guard. So, Chris, welcome. We've had a great chat already. Lovely to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Jonathan.
Yeah, well, look, you're no slouch as far as public speaking. You speak around the world, and you've spoken on many podcasts. But let's just have a little look at Shazam and the beginnings of Shazam. What inspired you to create it, and how did you overcome the initial skepticism from all those people who went, "Nah, that'll never work. It's impossible." How did you get it going?
Yeah, so it was a long time ago. It was in late 2019 when I had the idea. And fortunately, I remember this well because I'm now working on a book and I do keynote speaking around it. And so it helps me bring back all the stories and my mindsets and so on from the time. But honestly, there were a couple of things happening at the same time. I guess three simultaneous things. One is that I had decided I would like to start a company and be an entrepreneur. I was doing my MBA at UC Berkeley, and I was inspired by someone I met who was a year above me at UC Berkeley who had started a company. And he actually was a former Air Force pilot. And I thought, oh, wow, if a former Air Force pilot can start a company, I should be able to start a company. So that was one piece of the inspiration. The second is that I just simply had this problem that, frankly, many people did at the time. So it wasn't novel by any means, but was just wanting to know what songs were when I would hear them. And back then there was no solution for that. So if you were out and about with friends in a bar or club or cafe or anywhere, and you heard a song, literally your only option, I mean, if it was a DJ, you could, I guess, go speak to the DJ and tell him to take his headset off and say, ask him, can you tell me what this song is? But if it was radio, then maybe the DJ announcer would mention the song. But most of the time, there was no solution other than simply ask the people around you. And again, of course, as you might expect, especially if it's not a mainstream hit song, they wouldn't know the answer. So there was that was a frustration for me. And then the third thing was seeing this opportunity because at that time mobile phones were very, very basic. They were not smartphones. They had little monochrome screens with something like 60 by 80 pixels, and really people just used phones to make phone calls and send text messages at the time. And so I was thinking, gosh, I mean, at that time, it was literally like just a couple years before that, no one had phones, or very few people did. And then later, many people were getting, almost everyone was getting phones. And so I'm thinking, well, everyone's walking around with these phones. What else could I come up with that people could do with it? If I could come up with a new idea, wow, just think of the opportunity. All these people walking around with this device in their pocket, and all they can do is make phone calls and send text messages. So those three things all coming together led to the idea for Shazam.
Oh, it's fantastic. And were you working in Google or Dropbox then, or were you what were you doing?
No, I was in the middle. I was actually in my MBA program at UC Berkeley, a full-time 2-year MBA.
That's
Yeah.
cool.
So yeah,
That's
Dropbox,
cool.
Google, and Dropbox. I joined years after starting Shazam. So in about 2004, I joined Google when it was still a private company.
Yeah, well, what a hell of a life you've had, and as I say, you've made a difference to so many people who've had the benefits of that. But the entrepreneurial side is the thing you are passionate about, and I'm interested in the journey and the lessons you raise from you develop from raising funds. And I mean, you were near bankruptcy, if I understood it, in the early days of Shazam, and you had to get the funds. And you and I were talking about being focused. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it was really, really hard times to raise money. the dot-com bubble had just popped, and it was venture capitalists had lost, a lot of their investments were imploding. They were trying to save their investments, and they certainly were steering clear of investing in many new startups, particularly what they call consumer startups. So a business where you're marketing to consumers, like Shazam, rather than business to business. And so it was tremendously difficult. We pitched to over 100 venture capital firms to raise money, and they just one after the other just declined, and they just had no interest in investing. They viewed us as being very risky, and frankly, any consumer business is a very high risk with regards to the consumer adoption. And so we just kept persisting. We just focused on trying to tell a story and achieve sort of conquering some of the core goals we had as much as possible to make ourselves look like a more well-placed startup. So for example, we sought angel investors to kind of invest in the company early on, but rather than just focus on getting a bit of money in the company, and we did raise about $1 million in angel investing, we decided to kind of do two things at the same time: get the angel investing in, but also create credibility for the company alongside it. So we targeted angel investors who kind of brought credibility to the company. So we ended up getting the former chairman of EMI, which is one of the major record labels. He was actually based in London. And then the former chairman of BMG UK, again, Bertelsmann, one of the major record labels. And then the chief technology officer of British Telecom at the time. So we sort of purposely sought these specific individuals so that we'd both get some money into the company, but also validate, sort of our thesis. And actually, it made a big difference. The venture capitalists looked at that and thought, "Gosh, they have investment money, but look at who they have it from. That's amazing." It's not just simply saying they're advisors to the company. They put their own hard-earned money into the company. So that was one thing we did. We of course invented this impossible algorithm to identify music, which was not feasible, and we had to pioneer that. We filed patents around it. We came up with a whole game plan of how we were going to build this business. We sought letters of intent because we needed mobile partnerships from mobile phone companies, and so we went out and we met with these big mobile phone companies, and here we are, just this little startup with 4 co-founders and a patent, and that's it, and nothing else. And we would meet with these mobile operators and try to convince them to enter into these letters of intent, with basically a letter that would basically say, yes, we plan to partner with this startup if it can seek funding and build out this business. That's a pretty hard thing to do with a big giant company that really can't be bothered to take these types of meetings. But we needed that for the venture capitalists. So all kinds of things to sort of just build that credibility, de-risk the vision of the business, and succeed in raising venture capital.
Well, fantastic, and well done. And I think what I'm taking away from all that is, focus, resilience, and you get knocked back again and again. I mean, I had a guest on the other day, just 21 years old. She's Zara Lackland. She's rowed on her own, unassisted, no support vehicle, just her in a boat from Portugal all the way across the Atlantic to French Guiana. It took her 97 days, 9 hours and 20 minutes to get all the way across 3,600 miles. And some of the times when she was in the Canary Islands or the Azores, I think one or the other, she was rowing for 15 hours and she made 5 miles. She was getting pushed back, and she did that for 2 weeks. But she kept going, and eventually she got through it, and she made the thing, and she's broken 3 world records. And you, in your own way, it's a bit like that. You were trying 100 different companies, always getting knocked back. What kept you going when you just get the kickback and the kickback and the kickback? What kept you going?
I think it's my own. I have an inherent sort of quality of being persistent. It's sort of a characteristic I had as a child, sort of very determined, almost defiant, really. And when I encountered things that were difficult, rather than being diverted from them, I often was more attracted to things that were difficult. If it seemed impossible, then I thought, oh, that now I really want to do it, because how impressive, will that be if I can accomplish this? And also, what a great, uh, differentiator to do something that other people are not expecting you could do at all. I think I've never really understood why I'm like that, but I sometimes think that it's because I have dyslexia, so I struggled with academics as a child, and it was a frustrating thing where you feel like you're pretty smart, but you would then really struggle with things that are relatively easy for other kids, and so you end up having to. I mean, I didn't know back then they didn't really diagnose kids with dyslexia, so
They certainly
I
didn't know.
yeah, so I didn't know I was dyslexic. I didn't even know what dyslexia was. But all I know is you end up having to come up with your own kind of coping mechanisms and little, I call them hacks now, your hacks of how you're going to, do math or do English, or, be able to like read the pieces of a book that you just need to read in order to answer the essay, and things like that. And so you come up with all these hacks, and honestly, the combination of coming up with the hacks and also implementing them, and having the persistence to do it, it ends up, I think it gives, it leads to sort of this sort of resilience, I think, often for dyslexics, because you've had to do that.
Well, I'm just going to do a plug of a friend of mine who was on the podcast. The book is called The Dyslexic Edge by Jamie Waller, Unleashing the Power of Thinking Differently. And he had a number of people, Sir Charles Dunstan, who started Carphone Warehouse, and he also had, I'm just thinking, the Virgin, Sir Richard Branson. He
Oh
interviewed
yeah,
them all about why, as entrepreneurs, they use their creativity to actually help them, even though they're dyslexic, like you and me. It actually served as a superpower. But at the time, I remember being told I was thick and I was going to become a dustman because I couldn't do my maths and I couldn't spell. And my spelling was awful. Thank God for AI and Grammarly and tools like that. But I think it is interesting how it does give many entrepreneurs who are dyslexic a real determination to overcome the kickback and being run down and being dismissed as being thick. And I remember until I was in my mid 30s, if people said, you're really clever. And I go, no, I am thick. And I literally, it was my label because the teacher had told me age 9 that I was thick. And so
yeah,
that was my label. And so it's really quite hard to overcome that. And there's some moments where some of them it really hurt them deeply for many a year, the labels they were given, because people didn't understand what it was, did they? They did not know what was going on. And many of these successful entrepreneurs and CEOs and leaders and forces, senior officers, either have ADHD or dyslexia or something that makes us so extreme that we will overcome what normal people do. You are not normal, Chris. You haven't done a normal life. I mean, you then went and you joined Google and you joined Dropbox as well. And that was probably in the early stage when they weren't as famous as they are now, world famous. Tell us about your time at Google and Dropbox and how that influenced your entrepreneurial startup approach.
yeah. I mean, well, well, again, so I started Shazam before Google and Dropbox. So I started Shazam in 2000, joined Google in 2004. At that time, Google was 2,000 people. It was a private company, and it was running up to its IPO. I think it was about 6 months before its IPO, roughly. And I was their first mobile partnerships employee. So doing the big mobile partnerships with, you name it, the big mobile carriers and device manufacturers around the world. And then I spent 8 years there. I also joined the Android team when Android became a thing at Google. Back when it was a small team, and they had only had one Android device in the world, called the G1 Android mobile phone on T-Mobile. And then after 8 years at Google, I went to Dropbox when it was also a startup, 90 people. Eventually grew to a couple thousand people, but about 90 people, and rapidly growing. And I think the interesting learning from both of those companies was that there was I got a lot of exposure to the way the founders are thinking, the way that these product leaders, the original creations of the products and the philosophies they had, and it was just fascinating to watch being part of these very big companies, companies that became very big companies and very successful companies, and mapping the way they were thinking and the way they were winning against my own experiences with Shazam. And often at that point, I'm on the board of Shazam, and Shazam is still this struggling company for years and upon years. But I would bring a lot of these learnings back to the board and say, well, we need to. I'll give you one example. I mean, Google, one of its big differentiators that many people are not aware of is that it was very fast. So it's not just about how good the search results were, but also how fast they were. And it would invest heavily end to end to increase the speed of search, all the way from the network, the computers, the algorithms, every piece of it. And so I realized the speed was actually extremely important. And I brought that back to Shazam because Shazam was actually struggling in terms of speed. And there's a bunch of things we had the opportunity to do to make the Shazam experience much faster, but they're all very, very difficult. Just like Google's things were very difficult. I mean, buying dark fiber across the Atlantic Ocean is not an easy thing, and that's the type of thing Google would do. But in the case of Shazam, we had to do significant changes to the algorithm and the app and so on, all to make it fast. Otherwise, you'd have to push the button and wait quite a long time to find out what song it was. And so that would be an example of something that was not necessarily obvious, but I'd sort of bring it in from my Google experience and say, guys, this is actually very important, much more important than we realize. And it really deserves prioritizing a lot of engineering resources on solving this problem, all in the interest of shaving off a few seconds in the user experience.
And it is interesting that you're surrounded by very bright, very talented people, all with strong opinions, all probably talking at the same time, talking over each other, assaulting each other's thinking. How did you find, you've been very modest, so I'm not really into the leadership, but I am into entrepreneurship. But actually, I think to sell an idea requires a certain amount of leadership to get people to do what you want to do, to influence them, persuade them. That is a version of leadership. And how did you find working with some really bright, capable people, not only your founders in Shazam, but then with the guys in Google and Dropbox and other places? What have you learned from being around smart people who might be a little bit arrogant and a little bit cocky and not willing to listen to you? How have you managed to influence them?
Yeah, well, one thing I would say, by the way, is that one thing that Google did very well in their recruiting is to try to avoid hiring arrogant people, and they were very, very selective. And when we went through the criteria, one of the criteria that we had as we selected candidates to join the company, and we were very selective, was were they googly? And what that really meant was, were they, even though they were typically incredible achievers, incredible pedigrees of achievement and education and you name it, they were very typically quite humble and team players. But in terms of convincing, there's no doubt that anytime you need to convince people of a new idea that they're not already kind of locked in on, it can be really challenging. And I think that barrier is one that that can be very particularly difficult for like a leader in a big company. I mean, I'll give you an example. So when I was at Google, one of the partnerships that I was trying to put in place was with Nokia. So I flew out to Helsinki, and I would sort of pitch the idea of partnering with Google. This is in pretty early days, right? This is before before smartphones became as big as we know today. There was a lot of resistance at Nokia to partner with Google. They viewed it as I think the thinking among many of the executives is, we want to kind of go our own routes and do our own things. And when we're so successful, they're very dominant. They had a very dominant position in the mobile phone market at that time, and so they were not really open to partnering with Google. And of course, we all know what happened, right? I mean, it was one of the great, the company collapsed basically, and Nokia could have been what Samsung is today with, being a big player in Android phones and so on. But you can just imagine that, let's say there was an executive, hypothetically within Nokia that really saw the opportunity of really going with the Android platform, despite some of the risks as well. Just imagine like the challenge of facing all this resistance, where all the other executives are saying, no, absolutely not. That's not what we're going to do. If we do that, we'll be commoditized and so on. And then you're just faced with this challenge of how do you convince really, really smart leaders to change their mind on something. I think that the answer is passion. It's telling a story. I believe that often when you're trying to convince people of something that doesn't exist, what you're really doing is you're almost like a Hollywood movie that paints a really beautiful fictional story. You're painting a fictional story, but it's of the future. As Steve Jobs probably did with the iPhone at Apple. You have to be able to paint this. It's the art of storytelling in order to win over people into your future vision. One story I love is the story of the founder of the Sony PlayStation. The Sony PlayStation is the #1 gaming platform in the world, and even bigger than Xbox. And the founder was an engineer at Sony, and he had this vision of building a really smart PlayStation that had far more memory and therefore could play far more sophisticated games than the game players at the time. He took it to all these executives at Sony, and all the vice presidents who were all senior to him basically said, no, we don't make toys here. Imagine, we don't make toys here. And so he just couldn't get backing for it. But luckily the CEO of Sony could see the opportunity, and so he enabled him to build this team, and it became one of the most successful products at Sony. And so it was all thanks to the CEO having the open mind to see, yes, maybe we don't normally build toys here at Sony, but maybe there really is an opportunity there.
Yeah, and that brings up a lovely comment, which my friend in Florida, Jeff Nishwitz, said. There's 9 words, 3 phrases that are really important in entrepreneurs. The first one is, I was wrong. The second, I don't know. And the third one is, I need some help. I was wrong, I don't know, and I need some help. And that's what was lacking in those guys in Sony, apart from the CEO. It was lacking in those guys in Nokia, and it brings their business down. And it was lacking in people like Dick Fould in Lehman Brothers, who brought the whole of his business down because he was so arrogant when he dealt with Hank Paulson that Paulson wouldn't help him because he irritated him and he refused to take it on. So I do think it's really important in entrepreneurs and leaders not to be so cocky, not to be so arrogant, not to think you have all the answers. Wouldn't it be lovely if our politicians could cope with those 3 words? I don't think they know what those words are, but we won't even go into politics. Let's talk about innovation and technology, which is really your lifeblood. And you've got this term, start from zero methodology. What does it mean? And how can people apply it to develop groundbreaking ideas? Start from zero.
Yeah, start from zero is where the name that I've given sort of this sort of set of key principles that I think are ways to think that we don't do by default. And so, we really you have to have almost a self-awareness to make sure that you're thinking this way if you do want to make these big things happen, be innovative. And they start with, of course, coming up with the big idea, right? So that's the first one. I call it build from basic truths. And it's first principles thinking. And we all, many people know what first principles thinking is, but what's amazing to me is that I've done this at keynotes where I'll say to a whole bunch of leaders of an organization, literally the top 200 leaders of an 80,000 person organization, I'll say, who here, is familiar with first principles thinking? And it's a tiny percentage of hands go up. I mean, literally we're talking 5% of the hands go up. And I think, wow, that's amazing, because first principles thinking is the basis of how some of the great ideas have come about. In Silicon Valley, many of the founders and great innovators like Steve Jobs, Henry Ford, Leonardo da Vinci, and now, of course, we can't avoid mentioning Elon Musk. Have all used first principles thinking to come up with these big new ideas. So that's one, and kind of teaching the concept of first principles thinking and how to use it when you want to come up with a big breakthrough idea for your business. Then it moves on into, it turns out when you do come up with a great breakthrough idea, and then you try to implement it. Of course, because it's never been done before, my gosh, you will hit obstacle after obstacle after obstacle. And what we typically do is we tend to just see an obstacle, and I say that we kind of we respect it like an authority, So we encounter it, and it says, "Oh, the city, the council will not approve that," right? And we tend to see, encounter the obstacle, we face the resistance, and then we respect it. We say, "Oh, it can't be done." And instead, I have this theme of defiance, which I alluded to for my childhood, maybe as a function of being dyslexic. But we have to defy it. We have to defy those obstacles. And really, what I believe is the solution is what I call creative persistence. That's sort of the second of my thinking. So build from basic truths is the first. Creative persistence is the second. And the real insight is that we tend to talk about how entrepreneurs are very persistent. But what I've really seen is not just about being persistent and sort of not giving up, but it really is that creative persistence. And it's like, you encounter these obstacles and then you start really thinking outside the box to find a way around them. One example I give is when I joined Google, there was just one product. It was search. They didn't even have Gmail. And when I joined, they said, well, we're not only going to search the web, we have a product so that we can search all books as well. They were literally scanning all the books into Google. But of course, books are physical things, and it's very laborious to turn the pages of books compared to scouring the internet for websites. So they actually had creative persistence. They literally invented a device that turned the pages of books automatically so they could scan books at scale. And that's one example. In the case of Shazam, we implemented incredible creative persistence in the way we went around, for example, building our music database. There was no digital music database at the time, no Spotify, no iTunes, no Apple Music. And so music was in the form of CDs, and we had to find a way to get access to all the CDs and then get it all over and build it into one giant digital database that became our search. We would search across this database of music. And so we applied a lot of creative persistence to partner with a company, get access to those CDs, and then we hired 30 18-year-olds who worked in 3 8-hour shifts, 24 hours a day for 9 months, putting CDs into computers so that we could build this music database from
Wow.
scratch.
Yeah. I mean, and this isn't this an interesting, how it all began, and now here you are involved in AI, and I'm using it, like I'm writing my next book. It's called The CEO's Compass: Navigating Teams Through Turbulent Times. And I've done my first draft. I'm just sort of editing it now, but I made a lot of use of Google LM Notes, of Sonics AI, of Perplexity and things like this to help me take all the interviews like this one with you and the transcripts and the best ideas from that to create this amazing database that, like an oracle, I can keep asking it questions. What do the top CEOs think? And I've got 360 different people's views, 360 hours worth of transcript, which is fantastic. It's a real resource. And so I'm just wondering, how do you see AI shaping in industries beyond music? What do you think? You've got your idea of God. You might tell people a bit about God, but how do you think AI is going to really shape things?
Yeah, I think I really think of AI as almost, if you just imagine the day before computers, and really, when I was a little kid, my mom was a computer science professor, and computers back then, what she would bring home punch cards, right? And so that's what computers were like. They were big, giant devices that only certain organizations had, and they were very, very basic. They weren't readily accessible to everyone, right? It was the Microsoft and IBM and the PC revolution that brought them to everyone. But there were, things were done without computers. I remember when I joined my first job, management consulting, a strategy consulting firm called LEK in London, and we
Yeah, I
had
know
these
LEK.
archives.
I know LEK. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I remember, we had these archives of all the prior projects we had done for clients, and I would kind of look. Sometimes I have to dig one up for some reason, and they would be these sort of handwritten graphs, like literally someone had taken a ruler and had drawn these graphs, and that was presented to a client because people didn't have computers in the early days of LEK. And by the time I was there, we did. But so I think of AI as being a bit like that. Now we just use computers for everything. Of course, when we write emails and we add things to calendar and we write a Word document and we do a spell check, and we just use all these tools and to be very efficient. And AI is like the next generation of tools, sort of that can revolutionize the way we do things, just as computers have done, and make us just that much more productive, right? So now we need to come up with an idea for an essay, and of course, previously we could have gone to the library and researched all these things. Then after that, you could search the web and read all these articles. Now you can actually just have the AI read the web, search all these articles, and give you a bunch of ideas. And then still, you're starting from a base of ideas, but you've accelerated the efficiency of doing your research aspect of it. That's obviously just one example, but AI is just solving so many things in the narrow categories, right? So whether it's automation of machinery or optimization of manufacturing processes or whatever it may be. There's all these narrow solutions that it can do very, very well. And of course, the big bet is the AGI, sort of the broad solution of being able to just think like a human and just do everything and then improve itself, where AI is actually just, the AI is literally improving its own AI, and that's the big bet. But yeah, I think in the medium term, ultimately the primary way of taking advantage of AI is to embrace it, right? You have to embrace these tools. I mean, email, being the computer revolution, email wouldn't be useful unless you got used to it and started using it. And so, with AI, you have to embrace it, learn how to use it, and really make yourself as an individual more productive, make your organization more productive, all by getting people to acquire new habits, change the way they do things, change their behavior, and make the most of what AI can do.
And speaking to, there's people in 126 different countries around the world listening to you and I talk about this. What would be your tip to the entrepreneurs and the leaders who are out there about, from your own experience, good AI tools that you found helpful in your day-to-day work and speaking and talking and travel? What do you tend to use personally?
I use I feel like I'm the only person who doesn't use ChatGPT. I use Google Gemini, which is obviously Google's answer to ChatGPT. I sometimes say I bleed blue because I just love Google products, and I'm so supportive of Google, and I'm a big believer in the future of what Google is going to produce in AI. And so I love the speed of it, and I love the speed of its evolution and so on. So I use Gemini by far the most. But the key, I think, is the way I interact with it. That's the most important thing that I think has opportunity for improvement for everyone, is the way you interact with AI.
Give some tips of how you interact. How do you tend to ask the questions of AI?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll give you an example. So sometimes just the other day, I was helping my son think about his sort of school project. He had to come up with a project. So the school said, okay, you come up with a project, anything you want to come up with, and then that will be your project for the semester. And then you're going to go about implementing this project and then write a paper about it at the end. And so the easy thing to do that we tend to do, because we're all sort of novices at AI, is just say, please give me a good school project, in whatever, history or biology, and just we ask this question, expect it to just sort of come up with the answer. But I think that the real art is to sort of navigate your way there. So to start by saying, what are 5 areas of we'll pick biology. What are 5 areas in biology that are can make a good home experiment that can be done without lab equipment, and that have interesting results, where the results are are quite visible, and can lead to a nice conclusion, because there'd be nothing more frustrating than doing a biology experiment and then having inconclusive results at the end. And then it gives you a few ideas, and then you say, then you have a few, and then you look at those and think, oh, those 2 look interesting, and then you can say, what are some of the key problems that occur, and because in these, what are the key problems that can be solved, and so on. And then you get a list of those, and you think, oh, that's actually quite interesting. And then you kind of hone in on that. And then at the very end, you've really zoomed in on, oh, this particular area could be a really interesting project. And at that point, you can kind of say, what would be the steps for creating a biology project, that's where that's what your goal is, and this is what you want to measure, and so on. So you see, notice it's like this iterative approach, where you're asking these questions and to kind of zoom in towards getting to your answer, rather than just trying to give it a question and just get to the answer.
And I think, Chris, you and I, when we had a conversation beforehand, and we were talking about two people that you want to, get as people you think are very inspiring to come on as guests on the podcast. You told me the story of how people often ask a very generic question, and no one gives them the right answer. But you were talking about the power of. Do you want to just tell us that story again? Because I think it's so good. The one about just focusing it right in. To when entrepreneurs think about what to do or who to go and talk to or a contact, and then we could really talk to the value of. It's almost a bit like AI. The questions you ask, quality of your question will define the quality of your answer. Just tell us that story again.
Yeah. Well, yeah, no. The pattern that I noticed is that, it was two particular scenarios that come to mind. One is when entrepreneurs sometimes will say, "Oh, I'm looking for investment. Do you have any ideas for investors?" And then the other example is when people I know happen to be going in a job search, and they say, "Oh, I'm looking for a new job. Do you have any ideas of people that might be hiring?" And in both those questions, I realized that it's a very hard to come up with an answer because it's so broad. And so then you kind of think, gosh, that's a lot of different people I know. I have no idea who's looking to invest in startups. Or like, gosh, there's a lot of companies in the world, and you're saying, do I know of any particular jobs? I mean, probably not. So it ends up leading to a very kind of poor quality answer because it's just far too broad. But what I encourage both the entrepreneurs and the job seekers to do is to be much more targeted in the way they ask the question, and then they'll get a much more productive answer from people. So, for example, I'll say, go research who, for the job seeker, I'll say, go research, who you think are the most interesting companies that you would love to work at. Make a little short list and say, here's 7 companies that I'm just absolutely fascinated by what they're doing, and I just know that I would love to be part of them. And then approach people and say, do you know anyone at these 7 companies? And because I'm trying to find a warm lead in the door, to open up the door to potential jobs. And then it's amazing because if you ask it in such a targeted way, then people are like, oh, actually, I do know someone in the marketing department of that company, and so you're really getting a really, really valuable answer out by being so targeted. And the same applies for the entrepreneur raising money. I mean, it's just not as simple as like who's investing in companies, because there's so many profiles of people that do early stage, late stage, rare investments, and I think the much more productive way of going about it is I'm starting a company in this particular area, and so can you think of anyone that has expertise and experience in that area that might also be a potential angel investor, and then going about it that way in a much more targeted way.
Because also I like the way you were talking about it, and you applied that yourself in Shazam, that you went out and you found guys from EMI and other, BT and other places like that, because you went, I'm going to choose people who are in the music industry or in telecoms. They'll get what this is about. And I think that's a really clever way of doing it. And it reminded me of, as a fellow dyslexic, in those very early days when we had cassette tapes, and that was really exciting because you could put a cassette tape in a little device or even in the car, and you could listen to Earl Nightingale. And Nightingale was one of the very early sort of almost like announcers come newsreaders, but he had this lovely, deep, sonorous voice. And he just had this wonderful voice for radio. And he said, I remember in the Great Depression, and this takes him back, of course, that people would go out and they'd go, I haven't got any money. I just need a job. I don't care. Any job. Just give me a job. He said, they never got jobs. He said, but I knew this one guy and he always got his job. Do you know what he did? He honed it right down, as you were saying, narrowed it right down to just 3 firms that he wanted to know about. And in those days, he went to the library. He went to the library and he read through, get books out of the library, and he read about these companies. And then he talked to people who worked there. And he honed it down, and he wrote a letter in those days, wrote a handwritten letter to the CEO of that company. He said, I'm aware you have these problems, listed about 10 of the problems, and I have some solutions for those problems that might keep you awake at night. And if you could spare me 30 minutes of your time, I would make it worth your while to explain about some of the solutions to your problems. He always got an interview, and he would say to them, let me work for you for 2 weeks. I'll do it for free. And if at the end
Hmm.
of those 2 weeks, you think I can add some value to your company, hire me. And every time he always got his job. He was never out of work in the middle of the depression. And it's what you're saying,
Wow.
but a story right back there in the Great Depression. I just wondered if that resonated for you.
Amazing. I love
Yeah,
that. I love that. Yeah, I love
yeah,
that. And that so it's what you make out of it. It's
correct.
what you make out of it. And people are busy. So if you do the work and just present them something that of high value, that's a great strategy. But
Yeah.
if you just sort of try to grab some of their time, like people are busy, and so that's it's not the most efficient way to go about things. Yeah.
Yeah, be a solution to their problem, not another person who's taking time. And I find this analogy of time. Like you very kindly, Chris, have given your time to be on this podcast. Everybody else, but it's a commodity. However wealthy you are from all that sensible investing you're making and your early Shazam, you cannot buy time back. Even
Yeah.
the richest guy can't buy time back. It's the only asset you really have. Other stuff
Yeah.
comes and goes, but time and to learn who you're going to say no to in order to say yes to your son, your family, your friends, your fitness, your health. People often give away time just like that. And people go, oh, can I, come see you for half an hour? Come and see you for an hour, that kind of stuff. And I find these days I'm much more selective on who I say yes to, because I've got a list here of my milestones: my wife, Lee, then my family, then my health, then writing the book, then the CEOs I work with, then the podcast, then building wealth so I can enjoy it, then experiences, and then charity work. And if it doesn't fit in those, I go, sorry, my heart says I'd love to, but my head says I have not got the capacity, because otherwise I'll have to give up on time with my wife. We have a date night on Friday. I'm not going to give up on the date night with my wife on Friday. I can promise you that. But you don't say it like you're a miserable old bugger. You actually just go, look, I can't help you with that. I've got so many other things on. But what I can recommend, read this book, see that person. You give them something, a direction, but you don't keep the monkey. So often people, they go, hey, and you say, I'll think about that, which means you've got the monkey. So you've now got their problem and you're still engaged with it. But actually to let them take the monkey with them and solve their own problem with a little donation from you of something to do or someone to talk to, because your time is so precious. What does time mean to you, Chris? Tell me how precious time is to you, because you travel the world as a speaker.
Oh, it's so precious. I do 40 keynotes a year all over the world. So that's of course a lot of travel, because about half of them are in the U.S. and about the other half are in literally countries everywhere. I'll be in London next week for a keynote, a big thing called Tech Show London, yeah, so it's just all over the place. You name it: Dubai, Mexico, Bucharest, just everywhere. So that keeps me busy. Of course, I have my 16-year-old son who keeps me busy, just making sure he's fed, because he's got an endless appetite, and getting him off and taking him to basketball games. We love to go see the Warriors play here in San Francisco, Steph Curry. And then I have a book I'm working on. So working with my collaborators on that. That's a big project. I have two startups that I'm sort of incubating. One's both mission driven, one to prevent drowning, and the other working with my son on an area in dyslexia that's very early stage. Yeah, so it keeps all these things spread across all these things. And of course, I want to have a social life. And like you said, health and friendships and social and seeing. I was just visiting my parents in San Diego. My dad's 90 years old, and that's important.
Wow.
Family is important. All these things are important. And so, yeah, time is the most precious asset. Absolutely. And so I just try to be as efficient as possible. I'm always thinking about, what can I do to be much more efficient with my time? How can I automate the payment of bills, and whatever it may be, get outsource this or get assistance in that, because it's all about being efficient.
Yeah, and I think we can get efficient up to a certain point, but then comes the time where you have to actually say no.
Yeah.
And there's always a danger. We're trying to please everybody, but in the end, it's your son who suffers, or you suffer, or your
Mhm.
health, or your sleep. And so actually politely saying no is quite a skill. My heart says
Yeah.
I'd love to, but my head says no. I know I have not got the capacity. The answer is no, but go and read this book, talk to that person. And I think respecting your time in a way that, the one thing about life, it ends badly. You're not getting out of this one alive. All right. Let me just let you into a secret. It ends badly. And I particularly was brought home to me 4 years ago when my brother David, who was 3 years older than me, was suddenly found to have had, for the last 2 years before that, metastatic cancer. And within 10 weeks, he was dead. Now, that was not long to suddenly start having regrets about, I wish I'd done this, or I wish I'd done those kind of things. If you knew, Chris, you had just 10 weeks left to live, what would you do differently?
Yeah, I think probably wouldn't change that much, which I think is a good sign, or it means I'm doing the things I want to do. So I may not spend the time I'm spending right now to file my taxes, because I don't think the IRS can get you if you're dead. Uh, but so I'd probably push some of the administrative things off to the side so I can focus more on the high quality things. But yeah, no, obviously I'd go out and spend a little bit more time in the outdoors, having fun with my son, and with close friends. I mean, obviously, I think it's these social connections, our family and our friends, that are some of the most enjoyable things in life. And so I would really focus on maximizing that time allocation to that.
I think so. At the end of the day, it's our family and our friends. No one says, if only I spent longer in the office, or I wish I'd given another 5 keynotes instead of what I've done. And so I think it is important that you do respect that. So go and, after this, get out into the outdoors, go and take your son, go camping, go for a hike, because suddenly it's all over. And my children are now in their 30s. I've got 4 children, 2 of my own, 2 daughters, a stepson and a stepdaughter, and love them all. And I've got grandchildren, and I'm seeing them 3, 4 years old. One's 6 months old, another one's about to be born. And these are special times, and it goes so quickly because we're so busy, and I've got to give another keynote, but have you chatted to your son? So I think it's a bit of a wake-up call, and occasionally we need to smell the coffee and just go, what really matters? And I think you've probably come across leaders who probably have got it wrong. I've met many who are very, very rich, but actually very time poor, and they don't know their children. And one actually said to me, he said, I would give anything to have 5 more minutes with my children at the time they were growing up. And I didn't. I was too busy building my career, being successful, being famous, doing what I thought was saving the world. But actually, at the end of the day, a lot of those people don't come to your funeral, and your funeral's too late. You want to be able to celebrate it. I had my 60th birthday 3 years ago now. And my wife arranged a really special occasion with lots of people coming. And I sort of knew the kind of people I'd like to come, but she got them all there. But she also surprised me. And my daughters walked me up to what I thought was where this party was going to be. It actually turned out to be, it was the village church. We live in a beautiful village, and there's this really old church. And I go, what are they? Is the party in the church? And they went, no, just come on up, Daddy. They said, knock on the door. So I knocked on the door, and this person opened it, and he was in vicar's garb. I went, oh, that's really good. That's a great joke. Oh, it's the guy pretending to be a vicar. And he closed the door again. And I went, guys, what's going on? They said, Daddy, knock again on the door. So I knocked again on the door, and he opened the door, and he said, welcome in. And I looked beyond him, and there was my wife, Lee, in a white wedding dress. I just choked up because we were renewing our vows. I didn't know that. She'd arranged our whole thing, and the church was full with my friends and our family. And we renewed our marriage vows with this amazing vicar who had a great sense of humor, made us all laugh. But it was a serious ceremony to renew our marriage vows. And I will never forget that. Those are moments that on my deathbed, I'll remember that.
Yeah.
Will I remember the fact that, I didn't do this thing as well as I could have done, or someone was grumpy with me? No, but I will remember that. What's a moment in your life, Chris, that you'll remember, a special moment with your son, perhaps, or something that you've done that you treasure, and you'll look back and you'll remember that on your deathbed?
Oh gosh, there's so many. I have so many. I'm often reminding my son of things. I love to remind him now when he's 16 of things from when he was 7 because he still remembers them. One of them, one that comes to mind is I used to love taking my son to this trampoline. It was a big trampoline place that was in Oregon, and there's kids of all ages jumping on these trampolines, but they created a game of dodgeball, and so you'd have all these kids jumping up and down and throwing these volleyballs at each other and playing dodgeball. And my son just loved this game, and I would love going to watch him, but he was really good at it. He was so good at it, and he earned the nickname at this place, the Beast, because he was this little yeah, because he was like this little like kid, must have been like, I don't know, 7 or 8 around there, and just all the other kids were much bigger. There were kids that were sort of 17, more than double his size, but he was just so good at like jumping all around and dodging the balls and getting people with his incredible bullet style throw. And I so enjoyed watching him do that, and I was just reminding him of that yesterday. But I just love taking him and watching him be the beast at this dodgeball sort of activity. But yeah, so, and I just thought of this little story as you told that story of being so busy, and especially CEOs and leaders being so busy. I just have to tell you this story if I can, where I had this really funny conversation way back in the early days of Shazam. So at that time, of course, we all know the mobile phone company Vodafone. And Vodafone had this CEO at the time named Chris Gent, and he was always on the cover of the Financial Times in London. Yeah, and so I remember, I'm at this time where I'm like, oh, I want to raise money from very famous people in either music or mobile. So I thought, oh wow, wouldn't it be great to get money from Chris Gent into Shazam, this little fledgling startup? But I didn't, I had no idea how to get to him. He was so busy. But anyway, what I did do is I looked up, did some searching, and I found the name of the actual prior CEO of Vodafone, who was the founder of Vodafone. His name is Jerry Wendt. And I found him, and back in those days, we're talking, the year 2000, 2001, I found his home phone number. I found literally this guy, Jerry Wendt, the founder of Vodafone. I had his home phone number. So being the persistent entrepreneur I am, I just called him at home, and he picked up the phone. I said, "Is this Jerry?" "Yes, it is." I said, "Well, I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm starting this company. It's music recognition on mobile phones. And since you're the founder and former CEO of Vodafone, I just thought you'd be a great person to invest." And he said, well, he was retired. He said, "Well, I don't believe in a lot of these startups. They're so risky, and I've seen my friends lose their money, and I'm just not interested. I'm sorry." And I said, but I thought, okay, I'll get one more opportunity here. So before he hung up the phone, I said, "Well, is there anyone you can think of that would be a good person from the mobile industry that might be interested in investing? Anyone that comes to mind?" And he said, "Well, how about Chris Gent?" And I thought, well, oh my gosh, Chris Gent's the CEO of Vodafone, on the cover of the Financial Times every day, And I said to him, "Do you really think I can approach Chris Gent?" And then Jerry said, "Well, you're approaching me, and I'm the founder of Vodafone." And I thought, well, that's true. I said, "Don't you think he's really busy? I mean, he's on the cover of the Financial Times, the CEO of Vodafone. Don't you think he's really, really busy?" And then Jerry said, "No, I used to be the CEO of Vodafone, and it's really not that much work." I'll never forget those exact words, and I just thought it was so funny. He had such a good sense of humor about it all. It's really not that much work. Here's the inside scoop. So anyway, neither of them invested, and I never got to Chris Gent, but I'll never forget that conversation on the phone.
No, that's great. Of course, the closing line was, "Do you mind giving me his number, and I'll give him a call and say you recommended him."
Right. That's
great. Well, look, hey, Chris, this has been such a joy of a journey. And particularly, I was interested on the dyslexia side. Is your son dyslexic like you and me?
Yes, diagnosed dyslexic, yes.
Okay, and what is the particular sort of project that you and he are working on? Do you want to tell us about it, or is it a bit top secret?
Yeah, it's a little early stage, so I'm not talking, but it's essentially helping with the diagnosis of dyslexia. So there's actually many different methods of diagnosis. It's a challenging problem because there's disagreement about what diagnosis is most valid, and it's laborious and difficult and time consuming and so on. So we're actually still we're evaluating the solution. So I wouldn't even say we have necessarily actually have a clear focus and solution, but I just know it more to be a problem, and I'm fascinated by it. I don't think it's a big financial opportunity, but I definitely think it's a meaningful, impactful thing that we could try to
Yeah.
improve.
I think it would be fabulous. And someone was saying to me, one of my dyslexic friends, that actually if you're born in China and you're dyslexic in a different way from someone in America or the UK because of our language and the way we
Yeah.
read. It's different. The brain, it's a different part of the brain that's lighting up in a different way, which is fascinating. The front part or the back, it's different for those different ways, those different cultures. So I think that in itself is interesting.
And I'll add one thing that I'm doing that's making this startup unique is that I'm seeing it as an opportunity to do a startup, but also teach my son how to do a startup. So he's actually my boss. He's the CEO and he's the co-founder. And so we're going through this evolution of creating this startup, and it's sort of step by step, so he can kind of shadow me, and I can teach him the art of being an entrepreneur.
I think that's really interesting. And as I say, you need to get Jamie Waller's book, The Dyslexic Edge. I'll do a pump for Jamie, because, of course, he's interviewed a number of dyslexic. You'd love him. He's a multimillionaire who's started from nothing in the East End of London, and he runs a number of businesses now. So Jamie, Waller. The other lady you need to talk to is Kate Griggs, and she's run a business called Made by Dyslexia, and she's interviewed all sorts of people. She's a very interesting lady. And I think you need to get Kate and Jamie involved in what you're doing with your son. If you want me to connect you afterwards, just drop me an email, and I'll connect you by email with the other two guys. And I think they'd find what you're doing really interesting. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
That's special. Here we are on air. I'm committing to help you in that one. So we're now beautifully at the end of our time together. Would you kindly do our little 2-minute top tip at the end? And this is going to be a top tip for entrepreneurs. So just it stands in its own right. So this will be used as a little LinkedIn piece. Say who you are, what you've done in the past, what you're doing now, and what your top tip is for entrepreneurs. Over to you.
Okay. Oh, so what was the beginning? Say who I am, and
introduce who you are and what you've done, a bit of your history. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm Chris Barton. I'm the founder of Shazam, the app that identifies music, has had 2 billion downloads and was acquired by Apple in 2018. I love entrepreneurship. I love coming up with new startup ideas. And I think one of the great strategies for coming up with fantastic solutions that can change the world is to start from the end and work backwards. And it's something that we often say that we're going to do, but we don't do, and we tend to think more step by step in an iterative way going forwards, and that doesn't necessarily lead to the game-changing solution. So kind of like if we all look at the iPhone, what a great product. It was really starting from the end, a device that you can just so easily use and do computer and internet and apps and so on, and then working backwards and thinking about what you have to develop to get there, such as Pinch to Zoom and all these difficult new things that it pioneered. So I like to do that for all my startups, is try to start from the end and work backwards, and that is how I often lock in on what I think are the best user experiences.
Hey, Chris, look, it's been a real honor having you on the Inspiring Leadership podcast. Thank you very much for giving us your time and sharing with people all around the world your wisdom, your experience, some funny stories. You've made me laugh. You've made me very reflective. And I found this a very powerful podcast. So thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me, Jonathan.